Hi everyone, my name's Chris. I'm an interaction designer. I've been working with various government departments for the last few years. Anyone in Gov might know me from such cross-Gov Slack channels as Prototype Kit, Design, and obviously CATS. But over the last few years, I've used the Prototype Kit quite a lot, and I've even run some training with different departments and different roles as well. So it's not just interaction designers that will use the Gov Kit. There's all sorts of roles, including content design, service design. I've had BAs and PMs turn up to sessions who are just mostly interested in how it worked and having the ability to quickly throw something together if they need to. So I know that during the kind of pandemic and the lockdown, getting training for this stuff remotely has become more difficult. And I tend to get asked a lot of the same questions. So I thought doing a YouTube video might work for some people and let them kind of jump back and forth to that. And hopefully this comes in handy for someone. I think the Gov Kit here, as it says, provides a simple way to make interactive prototypes that look like pages on Gov UK. The kit is also useful for people outside of government. I know different places that have used a stripped back version of this to quickly throw together prototypes for taking out to research to answer their hypotheses, and different kind of public sector organisations and private have utilised it. So it's a great tool, and I'm going to jump into showing you how to quickly throw together a prototype. So ahead of starting this recording, I've gone ahead and grabbed a copy of the zip here. So if you want to follow along, this repo is on github.com, alphagov, govuk prototype kit. You just Google that and find it. So if you want to grab a copy of the zip, I'll close this down for now. Fling across here so you can see I've extracted the zip. And what I'm going to do is open a new terminal at that folder. I'm not a big user of terminal. I do tend to just use it to start and run these prototypes. I'm not going to cover Git and kind of hosting things on Heroku as part of this video. Maybe I'll do another one or someone else can pick it up. But from a personal preference, I use a GUI for Git stuff anyway, so I use SourceTree. GitHub have their own version. I usually recommend that if you're just getting started with it. It can be a lot easier just to kind of click through something than have to use terminal sometimes. So it's worth noting that you'll need Node.js installing on your machine. If you are in a Gov department and you're using one of their machines, you might need to get an admin to do that for you. But once you've got Node.js installed, the first step for getting the kit up and running is to run npm install. And that's just going to grab all the Node packages that it needs. While it's doing that, it can take a few minutes. Just ignore any warnings that pop up. They shouldn't be an issue. It's just saying that some of these packages aren't recommended anymore. But it's worth saying that I don't work for a Gov department. My views are obviously my own as I haven't kind of thought about what I'm going to say. If I start effing and blinding everywhere, just ignore me. Yeah, there we go. We're done. So the next step is to run npm start. I am happy for them to improve the prototype kit. There is another prototype running on my machine, so if you ever see this error, it's just asking if you want to use a different port. You can go ahead and say yes, so it's moved it across to another port, and I'm just going to open that URL. And you can see we've now got the kit running locally. So that's the first step done, the first hurdle. You can keep the kit running. As you saw, I've kind of got a couple of different versions running already in the background. If you do ever want to cancel it, if you move back into terminal, and on a Mac you can press Control and C and it will cancel the process and you can close that down. So now we've got the kit running, it's worth opening it up in our code editor and just having a quick run through about how the folders are structured. So I've got Atom open. You can use any code editor you like. A lot of people like VS Code and stuff these days, but I prefer Atom. So I'm going to add a folder to my project. I am on desktop and I want that one. And so this is now the prototype. So by and large, everything you're going to want to look at is in this app folder. There is some stuff in documents that I'll touch on briefly as well as we go through. And we'll look at adding an image probably in at some point as well, just to kind of cover that off. And that's what this public folder here is doing. The application is being built out into that one. So we'll look at that later. But pretty much anything you do, you want to contain within the app folder. I know some people have made changes to templates and stuff outside of that before and then pushed it to Heroku, and those things have been lost. So that's just a heads up. Within the app folder, you've got some JS files, which include the config file. So we'll look at that first. You'll usually just open this at once when you first start a new prototype, because really the thing that you want to change here is the service name. So if I go ahead and update that to something, so let's say how to use the kit, save that. The prototype kit will automatically sync with the browser and update whenever you make changes to certain types of file, and these config.js files are not included in that. So if I just jump across here and refresh, you'll see that the page title there has updated to how to use the kit. And that's really all you'll want to do in config.js. There are some other variables that you can tweak if you want to, like changing the default ports and enabling or disabling password protection, but it is recommended that you keep passwords on for everything, just to stop people stumbling across these and thinking that they're live services. The filters and routes we'll leave for now, and I'm just going to run through. You've got the assets folder up here, which is exactly what you might think it is if you're used to building things, if you're used to coding. So you've got an images folder, which you can drop your images in, and as I said, they will get pushed out into the public folder for us to call later. There is a JavaScript folder. The kit does include jQuery by default, so if you are more used to using jQuery rather than vanilla JS, then it's there ready for you. There's a couple of other files, but the one that you'll want to interact with most of the time is the application.js. And this is where you can write any JavaScript you want to, and it will be available throughout your application. The same thing with Sass. So you've got an application Sass file here. It's importing a few other components and patterns, and if you like to work in that way, you can drop those in there as well and import them, or otherwise you can add extra styles here and just start typing in vanilla CSS or Sass if you're more comfortable with that underneath. So I'm going to close that, I don't need to save it. And that's all of our assets. The data folder, I mean, you can put other data files in here, but by default it comes with a session data defaults file. So as you move through the prototype kit, any inputs that have a name associated to that will automatically get stored on form submission into the session data. You can then use that for some really useful things. So you can just do stuff like playing it back on the screen. So a check your answers kind of pattern page. You can play back all of the things that your user has entered. And you can also do some logic based around those things, both within the page and within the routes folder that we'll look at later. So doing things like going to a different page based on an answer. And then finally, you've got the views folder, and this is the one that you'll pretty much stick to most of the time. So this is where you're going to include your HTML files, so anything that you want to display in here. You've got an index file, and the first thing to notice here is that this is using Nunjucks templating. There is some documentation for Nunjucks that you can look up. It's probably more useful once you get settled in with how the kit works and the kind of basic block style templating, but it does have some things in there like filters and stuff as well that are really useful, but it can be a bit dry. It's not a brilliant read. But the first thing you'll see in here is that this is extending layout.html, and that is the other file here. There's an unbranded one, but we'll ignore that for today. And that is basically allowing us to inherit a bunch of different things. So all of these imports here are the macros that you can find on the design system, so we'll look at that in a second. And then there are some blocks that are preset. And so above this layout HTML is a template file. You can find it in the node modules folder if you want to, but as I said, don't edit things in there. If you do need to make any changes to that, create a new one up in your app folder. And that's where the basic HTML page structure is stored. So the HTML declaration and any head information, and the rough structure for the body, so your main tag and then the different grid setup classes and divs. But it's utilizing Nunjucks block system, so it allows us to, like I mentioned, you've got the head, but you can overwrite the head with different things in here if you want to. It's also been set up by default to have an include, so you can drop in here, and if you ever wanted to add another CSS file, you can see that the one here in public that's being built from our application folder is linked to. So you can add more in there if you want to. There is a page title, which is what would appear in the browser over here. I tend to set just one of these to say that it's a prototype for how to use the kit. That won't update right now because that index page actually has a declaration that's overriding it, so we'll look at that in a second. And then it's also got a block for the header, which you've got up here, and you can see that it's pulling in the homepage URL, the service name that we set in the config, the service URL itself, and the container class. So those homepage URLs and service URLs, GovUK here links back to your homepage, and you can have the service URL here linked to a different place if you want it to, and that's where you can do that. And what this layout HTML file is doing is setting that across all of your application that extends this file. So it's a good place to set up the bulk of your prototype. But then if we look into index here, you'll see that there is an override for the page title. So I've set the page title in this one to be prototype, but you can see it's still reflecting over here as GovUK prototype kit. And it's because it will inherit the things in layout, but then you have the ability to override them. So if I just get rid of that, you can see that it will now refresh and update to the one that's in the main layout file. And that's really what most of your HTML files are then going to do. You'll extend out from layout, and the majority of things you'll want to do will be in this block for content, and that's the stuff that then appears as the main body of the HTML files. It doesn't include the grid system, so you can see here that it's then defining a new row and a column. Most of the stuff tends to be 2/3 by default, just so that the line lengths look nice. And that's kind of it for the main structure of how the prototype kit works. So I think we'll jump in and make a really basic prototype. Build out a little bit of a flow from one thing to another, and then start making it a bit more advanced as we go along. So for now, let's look in documents, views, and then templates. And we can see here is that there are different types of page that have been set up by default, and you can just copy these into your views folder up here. So I'll start with a question page. So I'm just going to copy that and put it in here. And the first question we're going to ask is what your name is. So let's just call that name. Again, it's extending layout. I don't need a page title in there. It has this additional block as well, which is before content, which sounds exactly like what it is. It will appear before your content, and it's just another space that allows you to include things in there. So we'll have a look at it. So let's jump back to the index file. Rename this to be my first prototype. Within this, we are just going to add in a link to our first page, which is name. Let's say start prototype. A lot of people use the index page as a place to store the history of their prototype as it grows, the different versions and the different hypotheses that they've tested, maybe even kind of linking out to various places like related research from the different versions, or where the repository is stored, if that's on GitHub or elsewhere. But for now, I'm just going to keep it really simple and just have a link to say start the prototype, which will move me into my first question page. You can see this is the default things I haven't saved yet. But that backlink up here is appearing before the content, as it says. So I'm just going to change that so that it takes me back up to the root if I ever want to go back. And then within the content, I'm going to get rid of the H1 here for now. And I'm going to be using the design system macros that I mentioned were being pulled in earlier in the layout file. So I'm going to jump across the design system quickly just to show you how these work. And the design system's brilliant, and it's got all of the different styles listed out for you, and it's got the layout for the grid system that we were looking at here with 2/3. But then within here we've got a lot of components. So the first thing I want to do is I want to have a text input. I want to ask what your name is. So I can come in here and I can see when to use this component, when not to use it, how it works, and there's a lot of information in there. And it's brilliant that we've also got stuff like errors and things for these now in as well. So there's a ton of information. For now, I'm just going to point out that we can copy both the HTML for each of these components, and we can also copy a Nunjucks macro. And you can see here, this is where that import was happening. All of those are actually set up in the layout for us by default though. So if you want to go ahead and copy this input, if you're following along or doing this afterwards, I actually have some snippets set up. So I'm just going to jump across here and go form text input. So the first thing we want to do is collect the name. So I'm going to give it value of name. I don't need to add any additional classes to it, but if we jump across here, I think we can see some of the different ones. So you can give it classes for how many characters wide you want it to be, or you can tie it to the grid system as well. So I'm going to leave that for now. I'm going to add the label. What is your full name? You can add a class on as well. So my personal preference when doing the question pages is to skip down from the extra large heading for questions. Just they can get quite long, and that extra large can get a bit in your face. And then there's this question around, is it the page heading? So I'm going to set this to true, and that's the reason I deleted the H1 from further up. So these have the ability to wrap that header into the field for this as well now. And then finally there's some hint text here as well. So if I just save this and jump back here, you can see now that we've got a question page asking what your full name is and an input. This is where the hint text would appear, but I don't actually need any hint text for that for now. So you can just remove any of the various values in this macro that you don't want to use. And again, if you're using the HTML versions, just get rid of those tags as well. So once we've got that input, we'll need a button to submit it. So I want a gov form button, and it's just going to say save and continue. So that's fine. If I save that, you'll see again it pop in here. And what will happen, as I mentioned, is because it will save everything to session storage, as long as you are within a form and you have a button within there, it will submit and save anything that has a name associated to the input. If you ever don't want to store one of these, you can put an underscore in front of it, and that just won't get saved to the session storage. It's useful very occasionally. And then up here you've got the form, which has a class and a post method on it, and then the action here is where the form should move on to as the next question. And you can use this action, or you can remove it and have it submit, and then start looking at using these just in routes if you're more comfortable doing that. But for now, I'm just going to keep it simple and put the action in here. So after the name, I'm going to try and get your date of birth. So I'm just going to put DOB in there, save that again, and then I'm going to duplicate this name one, call it DOB. I don't want a standard input. I want a gov date input, and it's going to be date of birth. Oops. What is your date of birth? Can't type. Again, I want that to be the page heading because this is the only question on this page. And I'm going to just drop this down to large from extra large so it matches the other one. I'll get rid of that hint text again in a second. And then you can see here, so the default macro that you can copy from the design system actually doesn't include the items. The reason I've done this is again for those values, and so I'll just delve into these a little bit. So you can see here that next to each one of these items, and these are all the different inputs, I've assigned the value for it as data, and then date of birth, day, month, and year. And so if we look up here, it's using a prefix rather than a full name. Like on name, we've just set it to name, and then the data was name. And then because I've given each one of these sub inputs a name, that's how those work. So what this will do is, if, for example, you had a check your answers page at the end of this and you click change and came back to the page, it will remember the answer you gave the first time and pop that into the field for you to then edit rather than you have to enter it again. So I'm just going to get rid of that hint, save that, come over here and say my name is Chris Armstrong. What is your date of birth? And that is my date of birth. I'm getting old now. And then I haven't set anywhere for this to move on to yet. So if we just jump back over here, I'm going to update the backlink. So if you are having backlinks in your service, remember to update those as well. You can set this for simplicity just to use JavaScript to go back a page if you like. I don't tend to do that, just it can cause a bit of problems, especially if you want to share partway through your service a certain page and then people want to find out what was before it. That JavaScript link is no longer going to work, so I find it's worth the effort just to kind of put those in as well. So that will go back to the name, and the action then, we now want a check your answers page. And what you can do as well is, if you come back down to these templates, you can copy this one here if you want to. So I'll go ahead and copy that up to this, open it up, and you can see now if I move in here, that's the default check your answers template. So the recommendation for this is, if you're collecting a lot of distinct areas and a lot of information, is to break that up into those different areas. So we've got a different header here across different ones, but considering I've only got 2 questions, I'll probably not bother with that. So we jump across here again. I'm just going to get rid of the page title, set my backlink, let's go to date of birth. Within here we can keep the H1 in this instance, but I don't need that H2. And I'm actually going to replace this HTML summary list with a macro, excuse me. So go all the way down here and create a summary list. So our first key will be the name, and then the value again. We want, if we jump back to name here, you can see that the value was associated was the data and then the name of the field, which is also name, which is a little bit confusing. Probably should have called it full name. This is why you rehearse things before you make YouTube videos. I'm just going to change that to HTML as well. I tend to like to tweak these things. And then we've got a change link next to that. So we want to update the href for that to go to name, and the visually hidden text to be the same as the key, so that it reads for a screen reader as change name rather than just a bunch of links that say change. And then I want another row, so I'm going to copy that, pop a comma in, and we want date of birth. And we saw back here that because the date of birth pattern uses 3 different inputs, we've got date of birth, day, month, and year. So I'm just going to copy one of those, jump back here, and we want day, month, and year. And I want to add in a space in between those and link them up. And then we want that to change date of birth. Save that again. You can now see that we're playing back the answers that I gave earlier. So for people that know me, I wasn't always an Armstrong, I used to be a Hanson. So you can see that that will then reflect there, and then when I click on that change link as well, the value is there for me to edit. So we've really quickly built a very simple application form here, and I mean, again, you've got a confirmation file down here that you could copy and link this button out to, but we've linked up a few files now, and you know how to do that. So I'm going to look at doing some other stuff that comes up a lot. So what if there was a requirement for this service that you have to have been born before 1990? When you were entering your date of birth here, rather than bringing you to this check your answers page, it'd be worth us just dropping people to another page and saying, actually, you're too young to use this service. So if we jump back here, this is where we'll start looking at roots. So it wants you to add your roots above the export line. So I tend to, just push that down there so you don't forget about it. And we're going to add in a root to add some logic to pull in the data fields that we've already created, and check it, and if certain conditions are met, do one thing, otherwise do another. So in Blue Peter style, I also have snippets for these. So this is checking that post that I've done in date of birth, and so that's posting to check your answers. So I'm just going to copy that. And then anytime it does that post to check your answers, it's going to now run this function. And so it's saying if this session data, which we want to call DOB year, is equal to this value, which let's say 1990, I think I said before. So at the moment that's going to check if it is equal to 1990, but we want to say 1990 or greater. Then it should move on to this page that says you are too young, which doesn't exist yet. We'll make that in a second. Otherwise, it should continue with the journey that we already had. So if you put check your answers in there, and then if we save that, we need to make a too young page. So I'm just going to duplicate this index one. You are too young. We don't need any of that for now, for this example. So if I update this so that I'm much younger, if only, and save and continue, it will now take us to this page. And you'd obviously have a lot more content here than this, but this is just an example for you to get to grips with roots. And if I go back and change this to my actual age, it will still continue to take us into here. So I'm going to look at doing some other things that kind of crop up a lot, and one of those is bringing in images into your prototypes. As I mentioned earlier, because you're building out from this app folder, then that moves into public. So I just need to drop an image in. So if I open up my folder, go into the assets and images, here is a picture of Jim that I prepared earlier. Jim is my cat. Again, join the cat channel on CrossGov Slack, you'll love it. And I'm just going to close a few things down now so I can see what I'm doing. So within the check your answers page, I'm going to pop an image up here. So we want an image tag with a source, and let's say it is in public and images. So once you've swapped out public, the structure will then say the same. So so public is equatable to the assets folder. So then we can jump into images, and Jim PNG is there. So if I put gym.png, save that, and gosh golly, he's massive. He is a massive cat though, he weighs over 5 kilograms. Let's just set that down to more reasonable size. So that is how you bring in images into your prototypes. And we've kind of covered it in Roots how to do some conditional stuff based on your answers as you're moving through the form. But I'm just going to show you another method for doing this as well. So you can also use inline logic. So I'm going to say if you enter your name as Jim, then you get to see this lovely picture of Jim. So if data name is equal to Jim, then we get this image, and then we just want to end that if statement. So if I save that, you should see Jim disappear because I haven't set a name here. But if I click on my change link, put in Jim, save and continue, and there he is, which is a lovely feature that I think all Gov services should have. There's a picture of my cat. This is where I've kind of run out of the initial ideas that I wanted to run through. Again, really you should, if you're going to try and become a YouTube sensation by making Gov prototype tutorials, you should probably think about it more in advance. So I think we've kind of covered the two biggest things that people worry are really complicated, and that is how to utilize data and how to do roots. And really we've tied those two things together. So we've built a root based on some data that we've entered. It's worth noting as well that the prototype kit has a link down here in the footer that just says clear data, and you can press that and then get rid of that, go back to your home page, and all of those pieces of data that you set will now be gone. If we jump back to the session data defaults, you can see some example usage here. So I'm going to copy that one. And again, I probably should have called it full name. Whoever built the kit thought about it much more than I did. But if I change that to name and Sarah Phillips, save that, we'll have to refresh. As I said, any of the JS files, you have to do a manual refresh. But because I've set that as a default now, you can see that it's pulled in automatically into the input. So that's useful in a lot of situations. A lot of this stuff is, you can build up on this as well. So you can add in whole arrays of information here, and that's particularly useful if you're building kind of more complex applications. So maybe you're building an internal service for caseworkers, and you want to build out kind of an array of different cases that they might look at. That means that you can then basically just have a version of each of these HTML files rather than maintaining lots of ones, and just pass the data into it so that you're only maintaining one layout for each of your pages. So you can start making some really complicated prototypes. Some people in Gov are more guilty of that than others, me included. But yeah, if we move through here, you can see as well that Sarah Phillips is there. Because these are just defaults, if I do override this and say, Sarah's also going to join me in the Armstrong clan, that will then pull through as well. So I think I'm going to stop there. That's been a lot of fun. I'll get this thrown up on YouTube and shared with everyone. Hopefully it's useful to some people. And there's a lot of other things that you can do within the prototype kit. So if you've ever had any questions and you're not sure how to do something, pop a comment on the YouTube video or get in touch with me another way, whether that's on Slack or probably not going to put my email address in this video because, yeah, weird. But yeah, let me know and I can happily make another video. Thanks, everyone.